All right, welcome to the final lab, learning how to evaluate large language models. It's one of the most important areas, so it's the last lab that we'll be looking at. We'll programmatically learn how to evaluate different LLMs. This is exactly the same way how we do it on our eval leaderboard. If you want to learn more about that, Andrea has made a very nice video that you can watch after this. But in this exercise, we learn how to programmatically evaluate between different LLMs and also compare how traditionally we've been doing it. So once you have access to this lab, we'll compare between Llama 13 billion and 70 billion and Vicuna models. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at the data set we were in the previous step, which was the data preparation step we were looking at. And we'll bring back in the influencer data set in this case. One thing you might have to change here would be the URLs. So please take a look at the course notes in this case to make sure you're on the right link. So we're importing all of the stuff, setting up all of our links where we connect with these models. And I've connected to our internal API. I can see all of the data sets that we're hosting at the moment. From this list, we'll work with Llama 2 13 billion and Vicuna 13 billion. So let's select those as model A and B. We'll define a few helper functions. This function is to query a LLM hosted at H2O GPT. And the query we're sending it is very simple. What is your name? And we'll print out the responses from model A and B. So it hopefully tells us that it's Llama and it's Vicuna, as I don't know how to do the proper pronunciation, but it did give us the right responses. So I leave the pronunciation to you. Llama model seems to be more chatty. Vicuna seems to be quite direct. Now we'll go back to our dataset from earlier and import it again. So you can see it's the exact same dataset as earlier. And now we'll take a look at how well can these LLMs produce LinkedIn posts based on the instructions. So we're going to sample 5 examples and then query the LLM for a response. If you remember, the instruction was to write the LinkedIn post. So we had added this in the previous lab. Now we're querying model A and B, which is Llama 13 and Vicuna 13 billion, for responses over these. Let's give this a minute. This is IM from 2 minutes in the future, and we've just gotten a response from both the models over all of these queries. So let's now, at this point, you should probably pause the video and go through these examples. Take your time doing that. But let's now convert these to strings, cast these to strings. Because what we'd like to do now is look at metrics for evaluating these models. One way of understanding how well a language model is behaving would be blue score. You can read more about it at this link, but to run it, I'll import from evaluate the blue score metric. I'll define the influencers as Richard Branson, convert it to a list, and then compute the blue score. So let's do that. And this is going to take a second. So you can see the original answer versus, so the original post by Richard versus the post we've got in here. And you can also take a look at the blue score, the precision, brevity penalty, all of these details. Another way to understand this would be the Rouge score. So we're going to follow the exact same steps and this time pass in the example from Vicuna models, in this case, model B. So let's run this cell now and look at the Rouge scores. So it does the exact same thing earlier, the original post versus the post by Vicuna model, and then prints out the Rouge 1, Rouge 2, Rouge L, and Rouge L sum scores. To learn how to interpret these scores, please go to these links if you'd like. But here, I want to emphasize how broken this can become in itself while you are evaluating LLMs. So, LLMs are these emergent models, right, that we had taken a look at earlier. How do we effectively compare between these models? How do we effectively decide if this model is more creative than the other model, or if this is answering a certain question better than the other one in a certain context? Uh, if you actually go through Rouge and Blue scores, you'll understand this is not the right way. Computing these scores isn't the right way. So the community has come up with this approach, and this is exactly how we do it at our own leaderboard as well. We use a third language model to evaluate or compare between these models. So how do we do that? We use AI as a judge, and we ask the language model to assume the role of an A/B tester, which is extremely professional and unbiased. Its task is to compare two AI assistants and determine which is better. It will carefully look at both of them and assign them a score from 1 to 10. Here are the steps it has to follow, which we have defined. Read through these, and then we ask it to format its answer in a JSON format with the choice, reason, and the score. So here we are setting the judge to be GPT 3.5. It could be GPT 4. It could even be Llama for that matter. And we'll pass it both the responses and ask for its answer right here. So you can see it says model A is its choice because model A got the higher score here. It also gives details around why it made that choice. So it's the reasoning behind that choice. So now we'll do this pairwise A/B testing over a bunch of examples. That's what we run in this cell. And you can see it's going to take a few seconds to compare between different examples and give answers. So in this final lab, we sort of learned how to effectively do LLM evaluation. The first thing we did was computed the Rouge and Blue scores. And then we learned a better way of using AI as a judge, GPT 3.5 in this case, it could be any model for that matter, to compare between two models. So this is one way of evaluating between LLMs. As a homework, try to compare between more models. And after this, watch a lecture that Andrea had made on H2O LLM eval and see how we come up with ELO scores for different models. This brings us to the end of this training, and after this, you're supposed to take up a quiz for the certification. So please feel free to run through all of these lectures, understand these things deeply, and then consider taking the quiz for a certificate. Thanks for following along on this entire journey of a very hands on generative AI workshop.